Order, order. Kate Osborne to move the motion.
Thank you, Mrs Murray. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I beg to move that this House has considered fire and rehire practices. This debate has been oversubscribed, and I think that says something about the strength of feeling and the level of anger over this appalling practice, and I thank all honourable and right honourable members for taking part today. One can't help but notice the lack of, or rather the complete absence of Conservative MPs from today's call list. I do hope that this isn't a reflection on how serious this government takes this issue, but I suspect that is the case. Perhaps the Minister can prove me wrong. I'd like to pay tribute to the workers of our country, the women and men who have battled so hard throughout the past 14 months to keep the country going in the face of COVID-19. Many workers have lost friends, colleagues and family members to this terrible virus, and now at least 1 in 10 of them face a further pandemic of opportunistic employers using COVID-19 as a cover to dramatically reduce workers' pay and terms and conditions. Fire and rehire, a process that involves sacking workers and hiring them back on lower wages and worst terms and conditions, a practice that, according to research published earlier this year by the TUC, has had a disproportionate impact for Black, Asian and ethnic minority and young workers and working class people. But fire and rehire is not new. In 2009, the Confederation of British Industry boasted of using the financial crash to establish a so-called flexi-force, in effect using economic uncertainty as a cover to replace permanent workers as flexible workers. The economic uncertainty stemming from the pandemic has provided another opportunity for big business to shift power even further away from workers so that they can boost long-term profits for shareholders. These are some of the same companies that have made use of public money through the government's job retention scheme. Fire and rehire must not be allowed to continue. Workers should not be forced to choose between losing pay or losing their job. Parliament must act urgently to outlaw this form of industrial blackmail. That is why I, along with my union, Unite, are calling for fire and rehire to be included in next month's Queen's speech, either in the employment bill or as a standalone emergency legislation. Because it is a national emergency and a national disgrace that 1 in 10 workers are already currently threatened with a practice that, in the words of the Prime Minister and the Government Minister here today, is unacceptable and bully boy tactics. Although I'm not entirely convinced that the Prime Minister actually knows what fire and rehire actually is, or what it is doing to thousands of workers across the UK. As I've said, fire and rehire is not a new phenomenon, but it has gained prominence because of the conduct of many major employers such as British Airways, Heathrow Airport and British Gas, some in circumstances that they claim to be justified by the COVID pandemic. The practice has highlighted just how weak the current unfair dismissal laws are in this country and how they really need to be strengthened. I want to take this opportunity to highlight an example from one of so many affected constituents of mine affected by fire and rehire, my constituent Matthew from Hebburn. Matthew had worked for British Gas for 16 years, an exemplary worker, once proud to drive his blue van, and would have been happy to see the rest of his working life out with the company. He's now newly self-employed, having been one of the 300 to 400 staff who have lost their jobs for refusing to sign up to new contract terms and conditions and imposed by British Gas for nothing more than corporate greed. Despite making more profit than the previous year, British Gas have used the pandemic as a cover to impose a take it or leave it 15% pay cut and other changes which have affected the time their workforce spends with their families by making the working week 3 hours longer. That's a whole month of additional labour to a year. Last year, British Gas issued Matthew with a fire and rehire ultimatum and gave a deadline of the 23rd of December for him and his colleagues. They were told that if they did not agree with the terms offered, there would be worse terms forced upon them. This deadline was pushed back until the actual date of the 25th of March. Matthew refused to be bullied by British Gas and was therefore given his notice on Monday, the 29th of March. And I send solidarity to Matthew and all other workers. What has happened to loyal workers like Matthew at British Gas is an absolute scandal, and it shows utter contempt for the loyalty many have shown for much of their working lives. British Gas, Centrica and their CEO Chris O'Shea should be ashamed of this reckless corporate bullying. It's sad to see what has happened to British Gas. Once a nationally respected institution, now a poster boy for the virus of poor employment practice that is now spreading like another contagious deadly disease across the UK. In London, staff at Good Lord were given a choice to take a pay cut or become unemployed. Good Lord have asked staff to take a contract with a lower rate of pay, which is below the London living wage. In Manchester, North West drivers have been on an all-out strike for over 50 days against cruel fire and rehire abuses by bosses. The company wants to fire and rehire its drivers and force them to work longer for no additional pay, whilst also cutting sick pay for drivers with more than 5 years service. In Loughborough, global field service engineers employed by Brush Electrical Machines, owned by Melrose, are being balloted for strike action in response to fire and rehire pay cuts of up to £15,000. The proposed contracts include reductions to overtime rates, allowances, holidays. The engineers have been threatened with redundancy if they do not sign the new contracts, which will leave them on pay rates well below industry standards. In Oxfordshire, Jacobs Dow Egberts will stop workers from taking summer holidays to thwart an overtime ban, starting on the 1st of May in an ongoing fire and rehire dispute. My own union, Unite, is representing our members in all these disputes, but the problem goes much deeper than this and will only grow as the job retention scheme comes to an end. Last year, the government asked ACAS to produce a report into the full extent of fire and rehire, which was received by ministers on the 17th of February. Despite numerous pledges to release this report and respond to it, the government is still dragging its feet, leading us to wonder just what has ACAS written that the government doesn't want us to read. On the 23rd of March, I asked the government minister during Biz Questions if she could confirm when we will get a chance to see the ACAS report. The minister told me that the government finds the practice of fire and rehire unacceptable, but could not give me a date or time when the ACAS report would be released. Here we are 1 month later and the government is still dragging their feet on this. I hope the Minister here today can tell us exactly when the government intend to make the ACAS report available, as they certainly appear to be wanting to bury it. We've heard a lot from this government about levelling up and how Brexit will give us the opportunity to have higher standards across the board. Now is the government's chance to prove that they are serious about it. The government must understand that well-paid, secure work is good for the economy, and greater security for workers would mean a stronger and quicker recovery. Our friends across Europe understand this. The practice of fire and rehire is already banned in Ireland, Spain and France, and is seen as unacceptable in other competitor economies where governments step in to defend their workers. Last week we saw the government move quickly to stop the European Super League in its tracks. It showed that they can make things happen when they want to, and when they feel that they will get a popularity bounce off the back of it. The government have made all the right noises about fire and rehire, but so far have done absolutely nothing about it. I hope the Minister here today can tell us just when the government are going to back up their words with action and act to outlaw this immoral practice. If this government is serious about levelling up and raising standards, then they must commit to ending fire and rehire once and for all. I hope to see in next month's Queen's speech either in the employment bill or as a standalone emergency legislation. Thank you.